All right, let's get started. People can keep filtering in. Welcome, everybody, to our event. My name is Joey. I'm a project manager here at Rebuild by Design. And today we'll be talking about the Community Reinvestment Act, what it is, and how communities and banks can leverage it for community-wide infrastructure investments. And as a brief overview, we'll start with this short 10-minute presentation. Then we'll dive into a panel discussion with a few experts who will introduce themselves during that session. And there will be a chance for Q&A at the end as well. Thanks for joining us. And so some of you may know us already, but we at Rebuild by Design work locally, nationally, and internationally with communities, leaders, and governments to implement community-wide infrastructure policies and projects. And we bring this approach all around the world, primarily in three ways: large-scale regional design competitions. Beyond competitions, we also work directly with communities to develop and implement localized strategies and innovative processes to address city challenges, and research and policy as well. Next, I'm going to pass to Melanie from Springbank, and she's going to talk a little bit more about what the CRA is and how Springbank is involved in that.
Hey, everybody. I'm going to do a very quick both Springbank and CRA primer. I'm assuming a lot of you are fully aware of how CRA works or how it's supposed to work in the real world. But just in case, I am going to run through some of the most basic items. So a little bit about Springbank. For those of you who don't know us, we are a community-based bank.
Oh, Melanie, I'm going to unmute you there. Okay, gotcha. Just
Okay.
let me know when to advance to the next slide.
Okay. I'm sorry. Did you hear my brief intro or was I muted?
We got you for part of it. I think you might have
Okay.
cut out for the last sentence there.
All right. So I think the last second was, can you move the slide forward?
Yeah.
Okay. So when Amy and Joey and I talked about doing this presentation, I said, well, we're not necessarily out all the time looking for additional CRA credits. But as Joey said, that may make us unique in some ways, but it also sort of sets the baseline for why we are moving pretty heavily in the direction of investing in communities around resiliency, retrofits, and the like. And I'll be joined by a little bit later as one of the panelists, my colleague James McIntyre, who is leading the charge for us in this direction. We are a smallish community bank. When I joined, we were about 70 million. Now we're 550 million. And moving forward, making the case that you can be based and serve a low-income community and still be profitable. So we are all about for mission for profit. We were founded in 2007 in the South Bronx, just a few blocks from Yankee Stadium, or Yankee Stadium is just a few blocks from us. Our mission is to meet the needs of small businesses, underserved communities, underserved consumers. Very robust program for small dollar lending. And we work very hard to help folks who own small real estate to maintain their buildings, primarily mixed use and multifamily, in low and moderate income neighborhoods. Next slide. We think of ourselves as banking for good. We became a CDFI in 2014, both for the bank and for the holding company. We became a certified B Corp 2016. And with that, as I'm sure many of you know, comes a commitment to consider the impact of all our work on our workers, our customers, suppliers. It runs the full gamut. And we were recertified this year, and very proud to say that we are still the highest scoring B Corp in the world. So, and then more recently, we joined the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. And, all of these designations are not only about how we project ourselves to the community, but they also hold our feet to the fire, because we want to make sure that we stay within the requirements and the goals of all these movements. Next slide. So when people talk about CRA, we like to say CRA is in our DNA and that's not unusual for community banks. As I said, we were established in 2007. We were the first bank to establish now in over 30 years. Most recently, we opened a branch in Red Hook, Brooklyn, very much at the behest of the community because there hadn't been a local bank there for over a decade. And in neighborhoods where high cost fringe products are very much in use. We are surrounded right here on 167th Street in the South Bronx by check cashers. No surprise there. We were really hard to create depository products, saving products, loan products, all designed to help consumers avoid, to build wealth and avoid getting trapped in high cost predatory cycles of debt. And very essential to us, we also serve the needs of small businesses that create wealth and jobs for residents of New York. And I should have mentioned at the outset that I am the CRA officer at Spring Bank, and being that we're a small bank, I wear other hats. So I'm also our
Melanie, you might be cutting
because
out.
there was sort of clear 3 times in our history. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're back again. No worries.
Joe, is that better?
Yep, you're good now.
Okay. I'm sorry, it's coming up with unstable network connections, so hopefully that will resolve.
Don't worry.
And as I said, we have been fortunate to receive outstanding CRA ratings. Both we are a state chartered bank, which means that we have to we are examined by both our state regulatory agencies, Department of Financial Services, and the FDIC. The next slide. So, as I said, this is going to be a really quick primer. I assume a lot of you are familiar, but of course, there are a lot of resources for anybody who wants to look deeper. So, the CRA Act was created passed in 1977, and probably the most potent issue at the time was redlining. So there was an effort to combat redlining, at the same time encourage banks to meet the credit needs of their entire community. So if you're based in a community, you have to be lending to the folks and the businesses in that community. The examination process is, and the folks at NCRC know this probably even better than I, is pretty nebulous. And not all that well defined. But in theory, banks are supposed to assess your record of meeting the credit needs of the communities in which you are chartered. For Spring Bank, our CRA area is all of New York City, with the exception of Staten Island. No diss to Staten Island, but we've never done a lot of lending there. And we also, within our CRA territory, we include Westchester and Nassau counties. Has CRA worked? Overall, I would say surprisingly well. And again, I'm very interested to hear Kevin's take on this. But banks of all sizes provided more than 130 billion in capital to low and moderate income communities in the form of mortgages and small businesses, and an additional 127 billion in 2023 alone. And some of this is driven, I think, by the fact that regulators also consider an institution's CRA record when evaluating certain corporate applications, like opening a new branch. And that's a real opportunity for people to engage with banks or to engage with the regulators about your feelings about banks. As I said, we've been very fortunate, always got an outstanding. And in the next slide, a quick overview of how we get there. So as I said, we're not alone. Many community banks engage in activities on a literally daily basis that qualify for CRA. So when people call us and say, would you like to do something outside your area to get additional CRA credits? Generally speaking, it may be a good investment. We may do it, but we don't have to do it for CRA purposes. It's sort of baked into everything we do. At $550 million in assets currently being examined under the small bank rules, we would move into the next category when we reach well over $1 billion. But while that does not require us to report on our community development lending specifically, we always opt to do so because we think it's so critical to who we are. And here are the key elements of our outstanding rating. We have a really high loan to deposit ratio, sometimes as high as 90%. What does that mean? That means the money that people invest here or deposit here goes out in loans. We're not taking that money and investing, and we have a commitment not to invest in fossil fuels anyway. over 70% of our loans are in our CRA area, and the vast majority of those loans are in LMI census tracts. We have never, at least in the years I've been here, which is 12, had a CRA related complaint filed. And we are very active with community partners. We do a lot of sponsorships. We have a lot of nonprofit customers, and we work with all of them. We promote economic development by financing small businesses and other activities that help to stabilize the low and moderate income geographies in our CRA area. Next slide. Thank goodness I'm from the Bronx. I talk quickly. Just one or two examples. We house at our offices, we host a nonprofit called Arriva. They have two, they have many programs, but two particular programs that are housed here at the bank. One is a Vita site. Last year, we did over 3,000 tax returns right here at the bank. And I'd say it's going on about 5 years. I believe we're the only bank in New York that actually houses one of New York City's financial empowerment centers. And last year, there were over 300 client meetings right here at the bank. Next slide. We also have a lot of interesting, innovative partnerships with nonprofits. And two of them are represented here. And the next slide. So CRA moving forward for us. So if we're not looking at the moment for additional CRA credit, and with the CRA modernization rules off the table, why are we moving so actively into the community-wide infrastructure space? Well, my colleague James McIntyre is on the panel, can tell you more specifics. A lot of really exciting things that are happening here at the bank. But I think generally speaking, it's critical business for us. We see a lot of opportunities, particularly where we're based, where there's a lot of old buildings. This kind of investing and lending certainly meets our mission in terms of how we want to be serving the community. And, looking forward, it'll set us up for that time when we move up from the small category for CRA purposes. And I don't know if you can all see it, but at the bottom of the slides, I note the fact that if you want to look at our most recent CRA exams, and the final reports, both from the FDIC and DFS, those are on our website. And at the bottom is my email address. And with that, I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves, but I am going to turn it over. Joe, am I turning it back over to you?
Yeah, turn it back over to me. And then when we get to the panel discussion, then I'll have Kevin and James and Amy introduce themselves.
Great. So I'm going to, for now, come off camera, and I really look forward to people's comments and questions.
Thanks so much, Melanie. Right. So Melanie explained a little bit about what this Community Reinvestment Act is. And again, it's a federal law that encourages banks to meet the credit needs of the entire community, particularly low and moderate income or LMI neighborhoods, to combat redlining. So traditionally used in affordable housing and small business development. And now that we've talked about that, what's the CRA got to do with community-wide infrastructure? So while the CRA has traditionally supported affordable housing, small businesses, and community development, there's an opportunity to expand it beyond this to leverage it for community-wide infrastructure. So qualifying activities such as flood control, stormwater systems are eligible under existing regulations, and they're all ways to support LMI communities. And this offers both banks and communities a mutually beneficial opportunity to protect communities and assets. And who benefits from community-wide infrastructure that protects against disasters? We all do. You might be familiar. This is our Atlas of Accountability map that shows where federal disasters have been happening around the U.S., and where post-disaster assistance obligations are happening for every county in the US. So definitely recommend exploring it some more. And we found that in our research, 99.5% of congressional districts have faced at least one federally declared weather disaster since 2011. And so everyone needs to be protected from extreme weather disasters. And extreme weather risk is linked to financial risk, whether you're a household within a neighborhood or a bank that operates within that neighborhood. There's a neighborhood or physical asset that will be affected by extreme weather. And CRA investments offer an opportunity to reduce risk exposure for banks and communities in the very neighborhoods that need to be protected. And also, as well, protecting communities is protecting assets. So, according to the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank and Professor Jesse Keenan, 57% of disaster declared US counties are CRA eligible. And according to the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation, every $1 invested in resilience preparedness saves $13 in avoided damages and cleanup and $33 in avoided economic losses. So, together, banks and community based organizations can use the CRA to shift investment from reactive post disaster recovery to proactive community informed infrastructure that stabilizes assets, reduces risks, and strengthens local economies. And again, there's a very real opportunity again to leverage community-wide infrastructure under these qualifying activities I mentioned before. And the argument can be made for how community-wide infrastructure protects LMI communities while also being eligible under these existing regulations. Um, and the strategy is to get community-based organizations and banks to work together. So if you're thinking, where do I start? Rebuild by Design has created a CRA guidebook for community-based organizations to equip them with the knowledge to engage banks and regulators to support community-wide infrastructure investments, as well as a CRA guidebook for banks, which aims to primarily help institutions strategically direct their CRA investments towards projects that strengthen community-wide infrastructure in low to moderate income communities. And you can find them both on our site and this bit.ly link, and we'll link it again in our chat later. And we did this work with partners from community organizations to banks. You'll hear from Kevin from NCRC today. You just heard from Melanie from Spring Bank again, and as well as the Center of Urban Pedagogy, who helped us create our community guidebook. And now I'll go into a little bit about the community guidebook. So the point of creating this CRA community guidebook was really to create a visually accessible tool that one, demystifies the CRA process for community-based organizations, two, helps CBOs learn how to leverage the CRA to fund community-wide infrastructure, and three, develop strategies to build relationships with both financial institutions and community stakeholders. And working with our partner, the Redress Movement, we held workshops with local community members in Denver and Charlotte to get a better understanding of what types of community-wide infrastructure folks wanted to see in their neighborhoods. So we did things like had folks write love and breakup letters to their parks and playgrounds and places they loved in their neighborhoods or wanted to be improved. And we developed these principles for resilient communities on what types of community-wide investments folks wanted to see towards their neighborhoods. And this is a non-exhaustive list right here of principles, but this is what we got through feedback, and it is an example of how to envision these different types of principles community members would want to see through investment like the CRA. And this is important because community members have a say in the CRA evaluation process. So there's a public commenting period where community organizations, individuals, and stakeholders can review and provide feedback on how a bank is serving its low to moderate income communities. And this will affect a bank's CRA rating. And we wanted to lay this out clearly in some ways that organizations can take action and also utilize the CRA for their benefit. So in addition to the evaluation and public commenting period, there's a few different ways the CBO can engage with banks on a CRA. And so on the left side here, you can see it's more of the relationship building piece. We're calling it engage key stakeholders. So this is really about using your voice and relationships to work with banks on how they can support community-wide infrastructure by showing up in public processes like the public commenting process we just talked about, influencing policy and ensuring that these community priorities are recognized. And on the right side here is how to fund a project piece. So turning your community visions into climate projects through strategic partnerships by connecting and partnering with financial partners who can bring resources to the table. And this slide here is very text heavy, we know, so we'll send it out after the presentation. But I also wanted to break down for both banks and communities on what activities banks may already be doing to support LMI communities and how these activities might be able to be expanded further to protect communities against extreme weather while also qualifying for the CRA. So some examples of what qualifies include activities like affordable housing, fall under affordable housing, community services, economic development, and revitalization and stabilization. And I know I'm breezing through this because we have a lot to get through today, and to support CBOs to do this, we've also created a cheat sheet here to help community organizations understand how to speak the same language as banks that they might resonate with and talk about investments in community-wide infrastructure. I next want to talk a little bit more in detail about community-wide infrastructure and what types of projects are we suggesting CRA could be used for. So some of these have been done, most are speculative, and how we define community-wide infrastructure is neighborhood to large-scale projects that reduce risks of extreme weather hazards and sea level rise while supporting everyday well-being. So an example could be a park that captures rainwater during a flood event, but also simultaneously serves as an everyday community space for community members. Another example is in Denmark, an energy power plant that doubles as a ski slope, or a parking garage that also keeps water out as flood protection, or a playground that serves as a way to hold water when it floods, or a hotel or office building that also is able to generate energy. And so in our community guidebook, in our community CRA guidebook, we also break down these types of projects by scales of investment or project scale, from small, medium to large projects. So small scale projects, we're talking about like household, small business scale. CRA generally has been used for these types of scales before. To medium, neighborhood to organization level, public facilities like resilience hubs that can support during emergencies and long-term resilience. We typically haven't seen CRA been used for this before, so some of these examples are aspirational, to large-scale community-wide, city-wide infrastructure projects, also aspirational, and we'll get into it a little bit more. And so an example of a small-scale projects is after Hurricane Harvey, for example, banks in Texas directed CRA-eligible investments towards initiatives that help small businesses and improve mobility for low to moderate income individuals. So in Houston, banks partnered with Lift Fund, a CDFI, and provided microloans, community outreach, and technical assistance to small businesses impacted by the storms. And they mobilized more than $1 million in emergency funding to assist small businesses in navigating the aftermath of the loss and disruption in the flooding tragedies. And the funding was made possible through contributions from Wells Fargo to the Methodist Healthcare Ministries, and support two new recovery efforts under the Lift Fund's Hill Country Disaster Recovery Initiative. And these programs include emergency grants of up to $10,000 and zero interest loans designed to help stabilize and restore local business operations. Next in Dallas, CRA motivated grants supported on the road lending, another CDFI, which offered low cost, low interest vehicle loans through its disaster mobility program. So this helped LMI residents regain access to transportation essential for work, healthcare, and rebuilding efforts. And just are some examples of how CRA can be mobilized in the small scale disaster context to meet the urgent community needs and foster recovery. Medium scale, these are aspirational projects, but an example of this could be resiliency hubs. So like, again, multi-use facilities for community gatherings, offering a range of services, which can include shelter, charging stations, cooling, backup power, water, etc. An example is a partner we work with called Eastside Community Network Studemeyer Resiliency Hub in Detroit, all the way to adapting schools for flood mitigation and additional community support. At the large scale rebuild by designs project, some of you might be familiar with this before, but post Hurricane Sandy in collaboration with New York City, the Big U proposal was developed to protect lower Manhattan from floodwaters, storms, and other impacts of a changing climate. So the Big U calls for a protective system around the low-lying topography of Manhattan. It's about a 10-mile protective ribbon of parks that wraps around these low-lying areas of Manhattan, as you can see here, and incorporate various flood defenses and community desired amenities. Another example is the Living Breakwaters competition concept that was conceived to connect physical, social, and ecological resilience. So this proposal here envisions a necklace of offshore breakwaters that help reduce risk, revive ecologies, and connect residents and educators to Staten Island's southeast shoreline. So again, a combination of protection against extreme weather, but also everyday social effects as well. In New Jersey, during Superstorm Sandy, 80% of the city of Hoboken was flooded with an estimated 500 million gallons of coastal storm surge, and many areas of Hoboken were without power for weeks. So in partnership with the city of Hoboken, we designed a coastal defense strategy called the Resist, Delay, Store, and Discharge to protect the city against storm surge and flash floods, enhancing community resilience to extreme weather-driven hazards. And the self-guided tour highlights these innovative resist, delay, store, discharge solutions that manage stormwater at every level showing how urban centers can thrive despite intensifying extreme weather threats. And you can learn more on our site about this. And just to wrap up the presentation portion of our event today, just wanted to end with some recommendations for both community organizations and banks. So for community organizations, for the CRA, we recommend acting before disaster strikes, utilizing CRA as a tool to support pre-disaster investments that reduce harm in CRA-eligible low to moderate income communities. Two, partnering banks to leverage project funding, build relationships through banks, CDFIs, and trusted intermediaries who can unlock capital and technical resources. Three, share community priorities during that public commenting period to shape CRA investments and strategically leveraging these opportunities during evaluation cycles, etc. Four, sharing a common language, communicating community-wide infrastructure goals and terms banks resonate with, such as risks, assets compliance, long-term community stability. And for banks, we recommend one, reducing risks and protecting assets while getting CRA credit. So, investing in community wide infrastructure to safeguard assets from extreme weather while also strengthening the communities where banks are doing business. Two, investing in community wide infrastructure under CRA guidance. Banks don't need new regulations to support community wide infrastructure. Three, partnering with community-based organizations to invest effectively. So CBO's on-the-ground expertise and trusted relationships will help banks target those CRA investments and reduce risks, protect assets, and strengthen neighborhoods before disaster strikes. And four, complementing public investments with bank investments. So as the need for infrastructure dollars grows, CRA investments alongside public funding can help advance critical infrastructure projects like some of the ones we've just shown and earn CRA credit and reduce risk exposure. And so now I'm going to transition to the panel discussion portion of our event. Melanie is our moderator today. I'm going to pass it back to you. I'm going to pass the mic to you and let each of our panelists come on video and introduce yourselves and kick off that portion of our event today.
Great, thanks, Joy. That was really well done and inspirational. I do want to say two quick things that I didn't mention, but came through very clearly from your presentation. Is partnering with CDFIs. I'm going to guess there are a bunch of us guys on the call. We are in a unique position as a for-profit, but a CDFI. And we actually benefit from investments because it is a CDFI, I'm sorry, CRA eligible investment to put deposits in CDFI banks and credit unions. So that's sort of an interesting working both sides of the aisle kind of thing. But I'm glad that I think that came through really clearly in the examples. So I'm going to, at your suggestion, Joe, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, only to say that John Moon from LISC, which of course is itself a very large CDFI, was unable to attend. So with that, we're going to ask each of the panelists to talk about who they are, why this topic is important. And then I'll have a bunch of questions. If we don't get to some of the things on my list, I will circle back with regard to, the kinds of things that people are doing in their communities, and how the barriers and the challenges of raising funds by nonprofits is either easier or harder in the current environment, and how we're all going to work with that. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Melanie. I'm glad to be here virtually with all of you this afternoon. I am Kevin Hill. I am the Senior Policy Advisor at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, more popularly known as NCRC. And if you're not familiar with what NCRC, we're basically a network of more than 700 community-based organizations that work throughout the country to make sure that everyone has an equal chance to build wealth and attain a high quality of life, and that your zip code is not the ultimate determinant of how long you're going to live or how much wealth that you'll have in your lifetime. We work with community leaders, policymakers, financial institutions to advance solutions and really build the will to solve our country's persistent racial and socioeconomic wealth and opportunity divides. So really glad to be here. Personally, I do a lot of policy advocacy around both the federal CRA and state CRA, and was very glad to work with Rebuild by Design and my other colleagues here on this panel to develop these reports because I think they will be very helpful and very needed.
Um, since I will not play favorites, I'm going to skip over my list of folks here and go to Amy, since James is a colleague. So, Amy.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much. I'm Amy Chester. I'm the director of Rebuild by Design, and it's been my absolute pleasure to work with everyone here over the past year or so on this project. I grew up in New York City, and if anyone's grown up in New York City, we have seen thousands upon thousands upon thousands of affordable housing units being built over the past 10, 20, 30 years, I guess really since the kind of 80s in New York City. And a lot of that is because of CRA. It's because the banks are pardon me, Melanie, to say forced to invest their capital dollars in the communities where they're banked. And kind of taking a step back, as many of you know, Rebuild by Design works on multi-benefit infrastructure on the community scale. And when we heard about potential changes to the CRA that could help community-wide, more climate-forward infrastructure receive funding, we jumped on the idea. Unfortunately, John Moon's not here, but we heard about it from him, and we said immediately, like, we want to work with you on this. And that's how this project started. So it's been just a, an extreme pleasure to learn more and more about the CRA. Now I could kick it over to James.
Hi, everybody. James McIntyre. I'm consulting to Spring Bank. I'm serving as their head of lending innovation, but really sort of helping cement, I think, and I think this is where ultimately where we believe this market goes is we're a community bank, and a lot of our lending we do is local, and so our risk management is local, and we think investing in resiliency is a good part of our business practices. And I think a lot of what my work has been both on the sort of resiliency side on the energy and the operations and the efficiency side, but also in the mitigation as to how do we actually implement solutions that make sense to our customers and to our communities. And we know that strength, especially when it comes to resiliency, strength in community means a lot. So how can we develop scaled programs that can work? How can we lean into technology to help scale new models on the finance side? And sort of it's bringing together, and we can get into it, some other projects that I'm working on, again, more on the insurance link side, around like resiliency and fires in Los Angeles. And how do we actually bring in, as Melanie alluded to, CDFI lenders, and this is through the resiliency company, but the idea of CDFI lenders and other community lenders to help de-risk communities, and shift where folks sit on the insurance side. So all in all, CDFI lenders are born with place-based risks. Or community lenders are born with place-based risk, and so our ability to sort of help de-risk our communities is must be, from our opinion, at least baked into our DNA, because we want our loans to perform. We want our buildings and our communities to be around, and our infrastructure and economic development to continue to occur. So stop there.
Great. Thanks, James. I have a list of questions, and I'm going to sort of flip around because unfortunately we don't have a list who would have been the CDFI on the call. And I'm hoping we will hear from folks during the Q&A on the question of how do you see CRA as applicable to your work? So I'm going to sort of skip down my list here because I think this is probably the most critical question for folks, which is what are the biggest barriers preventing CRA dollars from flowing towards community-wide climate and resiliency infrastructure? So Kevin, I think I'll throw that one out to you to start.
Yeah, I think that's kind of our big question here today. I think if I had to put one word on it, what is one of the biggest barriers to more CRA activity going to cloud infrastructure? I think I would say inertia. I think it's just the tendency for people to like to continue doing the things they're already doing. Some banks, not all. I mean, there's lots of great community banks out there, but some banks just may feel a little less comfortable devoting time and resources to a climate infrastructure project for CRA purposes because most likely they've been passing their CRA exams by funding more quote unquote traditional CRA projects. So that would be things like affordable housing, economic development, which are very good and very needed. And I think the guides do a great job of detailing, I think the first question is going to be like, how would this qualify? And I think the guides do a great job of explaining how climate infrastructure could qualify for CRA credit. I think the key really is now to help banks understand how investing in climate infrastructure will not only help minimize the damages of climate change, but also help them prevent, disruptions to their borrowers, preserve their property values and the property values that they lend on, reduce insurance and recovery costs. And I think we just really have to, I think that our call to really move this forward now is to really just kind of create more of that understanding that by acting on the multiple benefits of community-wide infrastructure, banks can protect their assets, reduce risk, and position themselves in their communities to be much more long-term economically sustainable. And guess what? You can do all of that while also passing your CRA exams. And also that there are opportunities to do this with, you don't have to completely reinvent the wheel. There are affordable housing organizations out there that, are trying to retrofit areas and make them more energy efficient. There's small businesses out there that are also kind of looking at how to make better prepare their communities for climate change. So I think we just have to just really kind of convey that as good as as positive as investments in loans for affordable housing and economic development are, there is now this kind of newer and much more pressing thing we have to address, and that there's plenty of opportunities within affordable housing and small business development to also address climate change.
But I think they're actually, just to jump in, is I think they're inexorably actually linked in a lot of the customers that CDFIs, community banks, I mean, generally, I mean, if you think about it, like every mortgage in the United States is backed by, someone has to have insurance on the other side of that. And if we are in areas where there is not access to insurance, and so we coming back to like where we've had redlining, historic, if we have areas that can access insurance, then we have areas that are financially like inaccessible for those for a lot of people. And I think that there are also sort of these considerations of access to capital. And I think this is why tailored resiliency lending products, and frankly, like, my comment is always like, we don't need, frankly, new resiliency lenders per se. What we need to do is make existing lenders, resiliency lenders. And part of it is how do you incorporate into like, I think affordable housing, right? Like a lot of it is like we can look at design guidelines of what we invest in. Do we pay more for credits when we're investing in LIHTC, or do we have different sort of investment profiles as a bank for, across, I mean, and the capital markets, and like you see banks, big banks buying bonds for CRA credit, right? There is like this sort of aspect, and making bonds and telling that story about the nature of the project, that like we've seen market examples of basis points paid in the biggest markets. Think about what we can do at a community level for really getting even access to capital. And I think the bigger questions, and this is where it's really cool, always the way that Rebuild by Design focuses on these like larger scale projects that really shift ultimately economics for large swaths of land. There are credit unions that operate effectively within the entire, like the Lower East Side of New York, which are dramatically impacted by the walls that are being built. And so there's lenders that have a huge portfolio exposure to these large scale infrastructure. So I think it's interesting and this is where our work is focused, because we think that there has to be both a primary and a secondary market for these loans to reach the scale that we need to flow capital in. But it's
I know.
defining measures around like where we lend, and incorporating them from like a small micro loan to a property up to the largest markets in the world through these really designed projects.
Yeah, it's really, I have to say, and James and I have worked together for a while, but I'm just marvel at what the not being an expert in this space at all, where the opportunities are. So I do want to ask Amy the same question now that you've been reviewing all this CRA related material for the last couple of years. What's come to the fore for you in terms of, what I think we've talked about the opportunities, we talked about inertia, people having to sort of think through something new and different. My gut feeling, and I have what I call my CRA support group, and here in New York, and met with my colleague today with Joe because we're doing a presentation for that group. And my gut feeling, and I'm not, I come out of the nonprofit world primarily, is that the CRA officers really want to do the right thing. That doesn't mean they have the final say, but so it's not completely bleak in terms of what the barriers are. But Amy, so what's your perspective on that question?
Look, the CRA officers have the best job in a bank. Like, who wouldn't want to be the one that gives, investment to low and moderate income communities? I certainly would like that in a different world. For me, one thing that we kind of toyed with throughout the whole process was trying to understand what the payback is. Because the CRA investment is a loan, a low interest loan, it could be, and it's not really a grant. So it kind of complicates the regular government capital process, where they can kind of go and sell bonds and fund their own infrastructure, and they're in and out and it's clean. This makes it a little bit messy and having to kind of figure out how they would have payback. There are some examples that are out there. I know people that are working with CDFIs to create resilience centers, for instance, which are very similar to community centers. So it's possible for sure. And that's why we created this guide.
So this is a really good segue to the next question, which is this is to everybody. Maybe we'll start with Kevin again. What can strong partnerships between nonprofits and banks create? I mean, it sounds from what everybody is saying is that the CDFIs and other nonprofits are critical to, particularly the nonprofits who are active in this world, are really critical. And what does an effective partnership look like? I mean, Kevin, have you seen some examples? And I'll throw that question out to everybody as well.
Yeah, I mean, from our side here at NCRC, we've done a lot of work with our members and banks to negotiate community benefits agreements. And the community benefits agreements, they're often done when a merger is announced, because just really quickly, one of the things that supposed to happen is that when a bank wants to acquire another bank, there's a series of things that the regulators check to make sure, in order to approve the merger, that the merger will meet or satisfy. And one of those things is, will it meet the convenience and needs of the affected communities? And we believe at NCRC that the regulators have not been doing the greatest job of ensuring that mergers actually enable banks to better serve particularly low-income communities. And so our response to that at NCRC has been to work with our members to negotiate community benefits agreements, which in effect, in a way, sort of set up, at least this is how the bank has planned to serve this community better. So there will be things like increased loans, both direct loans and community development loans, and things of that nature. And also it's more than just the specific outputs. It's also what are the things they want them to consider. And so that's increasingly, it is climate issues. We have had some success at getting climate issues into some of our CBAs, commitments for, renewable energy financing, supporting workforce development in the green energy field. But I think, to get to your question of kind of what are the kind of essentials of any kind of partnership, is the good thing about the community benefits agreements is they have very specific goals. Like, you're going to put this much towards renewable energy by this year. And we think that that's just, you need to have that very critical level of transparency and goal setting, because we need to have a way of being able to measure our success. And we need to be on the same page about what our goals are. And that's why we just think that one of the greatest examples of that is a really detailed CBA that says exactly when and by how much and by when will be done. And so we think that without it, I mean, partnerships between banks and community groups can be a little frustrating. Some banks are really good at like saying statements that sound like a lot, but then leave out a lot of details or just don't really convey exactly how the bank is going to do something different or do more of something. So we think it's really critical for any partnerships to just have a really clear sense of 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 how they're tracking what they're working on and what the ultimate goal they want to achieve is. So in this instance, it would be like very specific
Yes.
additional investments to how to deal with like this specific climate, thing like flooding that might be a bigger issue in a particular community or extreme heat in some communities. Like how are we, identifying and then putting up more cooling centers? It needs to be as specific and measurable as possible. Otherwise, people tend to get frustrated over time.
No, that makes sense. I do want to, and believe me, I'm not wearing rose-colored glasses at all about CRA. As I said, I come out of the many years in the nonprofit world. But I know when we had an examination in 2004, and I got off a call today with Joy with a friend from Ridgewood Savings Bank, and I have never met a CRA officer who doesn't take the exam period really seriously. I mean, the ugh and vey and complaining, you would think this was like, a really big deal, but in the best possible sense. So, but that doesn't mean there's not a disconnect within the bank in terms of what actually happens. But I'm actually been pleasantly surprised at how important it is to the CRA officers to get it right. Now, Kevin, you may have a different perspective, but I think there's some good news in that people care, and they do a lot of work to get the information out there in appropriate ways and collect the data. So go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, if I could just chime in that really quick. In my experience, I worked on an industries organizing team for like 8 years, negotiating community benefits agreements with banks. So I've worked with a lot of different banks. Most of the time, the vast majority of CR officers, I think you're exactly right, Melanie. They're great people. They really care about their jobs. They want to do the due diligence. Sometimes, unfortunately, particularly at the more national banks, unfortunately, the CRA officer does not have sometimes the most authority within the bank.
No, absolutely correct.
Yeah, and that is like if I think if we had a world where CRA officers had, were directly reporting to their CEOs or, at the very right under their CEOs, I think we'd live in a much different country, in a much better country.
I think it's a really good point.
Yeah, I think we at NCRC often say like, how can we make the CRA officer more powerful within a bank? Because our problem is not with CRA officers, the vast, vast majority of them. It's
Yeah,
with
no,
banks. Yeah,
I'm taking off the rose-colored glasses and getting back to my normal cynicism. So thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. We want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So,
Melanie, one question real quick.
yeah, James, I was going to wait. I'm going to ask you a specific question too. So if you can add it,
Yeah,
I wanted to see, whatever you were going to say, and if you can add to that, what do you see some of the, I think you've addressed it, but what some of the really big opportunities might be to collaborate with, some of the people who are on the call and community banks or banks in general.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing I think is how do we connect the dots? And I think this speaking the same language, the same thing Joy talked about, is a really important factor because we need to get and understand that like small projects accumulate over time, and that's how you get to markets. And if the biggest thing to change banks' behavior is give them a new product that will drive profitability. But I think that goes for any lender. If you can actually find a product, like it's what they say in like the technology, it's product market fit, right? And this concept of how do we actually design products that fit for lenders. And one of the things we didn't really discuss is access to capital because a lot of community lenders are actually constrained and like, hey, I can only do a five like Lisk and other folks. Like a lot of folks, have told me that among a lot of colleagues, there's a much more short-term construction lending versus term lending. And what we need to do is figure out how, through the development of products, we can create liquidity for lenders, but also create like longer term financing structures. Like we know a mortgage is longer. We know that financing solar is longer. We know that like sometimes like doing major infrastructure have longer average lives. So we need to also be able to source the capital on. And actually that's what, Valerie White from Lisk and I are on a panel about how we actually think about CDFIs. And I'm working on an event with partially with her and the Lincoln Land Institute on how you actually bring together CDFIs with HFAs and state housing agencies to create, for example, seller servicer models around small dollar loans that can flow capital down to originating lenders, community banks, and other folks. And we can develop new ways to source capital because these are the big things that we need to solve for. We need to solve for market barriers. And through solving for market barriers, we will solve for climate barriers because it's risk. This is all risk that our communities are facing, and there is no economic, like part of the challenges of redlining was always the fact that you were starving your own community for economic dollars. It's the same thing on risk management through climate and but all of these historic ways we starved necessities for capital, we're starving, ourselves for the ability to manage that risk as well.
Right. So since this one's for me, this went really fast. So I'm going to say we're 10 minutes out and we do want to do questions. So Joe, Amy, what do you think? I could run through the questions that I have or just ask people to,
Yeah,
how do you want to do this?
we've got a few in the Q&A, and I'm just going to read. We only have time for probably like two or three, but we got a really interesting one, and I'm going to open this up to anybody to respond. But the comment says, from central Vermont, Washington County is unfortunately tied with several other counties for the most federally declared climate disasters per that atlas. Thanks for citing our resource. And it says, but our communities are extremely small, very rural, often no or one actual town staff. So, in one or two extremely simple sentences, what is the takeaway? Go talk to some banks to get funding slash low interest loans for infrastructure projects and use this language. Love the code switching slide. Or is the message more that we need to work with banks to offer these sorts of programs? Are there rural examples or any interest in some of these taking on rural projects and hand holding? And I'm going to open that up to the panel.
I would actually just say talk to Vermont Muni Bond Bank because they
Mm.
actually do small dollar infrastructure projects that can actually be supported perhaps by community lenders. And there's a lot of really amazing lending institutions into housing in Vermont. And so they can probably, yeah, the bond bank is probably an interesting place to look.
It is a challenge because I see that Ramona making the comment that, if you don't have a CDFI or a local community bank right where you are, so that makes it a little more challenging for sure. So, Kevin, did you want to take that question as well?
Yeah, I mean I can give you some high level things. I think obviously like the best advice is going to be really specific to your situation, and feel free to email me cahill@ntrc.org to talk more about it. But just a couple of quick thoughts. Definitely organize. Consider trying to pull together other organizations that are serving the rural areas. Usually, how CRA works is all the rural counties in a state are lumped together into an assessment area. So the flip side of that is there's not as much specific focus on your specific community. You're seen as the rural parts of the state as a whole. But I do think that it creates the positives there is it does create, I think, sort of a incentive to organize other rural organizations. And then I would start talk to specific banks, but also talk to the regulatory agencies. Big thing you see this a lot in the guides, but this thing could have gone like 2 hours long to cover everything that we have in the guides. But a big thing is performance context. Particularly if you're a rural community that's consistently having flooding, or the climate change is affecting the economics of your the agricultural businesses in your community, that's a major threat to the long-term stability of your economy. And that's CRA. Like a big part of CRA is activities to revitalize and stabilize, and there is in performance context is supposed to be a little forward looking. And so I think having conversations with specific institutions is great, but ideally you want to get the regulators to start asking the banks when they examine them. We've heard that there's a really big need for climate infrastructure. What is your bank doing on this? Now, that might not happen in the next couple of years, but in a more favorable regulatory environment, that is things that regulators will look at and will question about if they're hearing from many groups about this is a really big pressing need in this area. They will look at that when they try to evaluate how responsive things are. Now, there's going to be other things. It's not but you're just trying to really build the case of like, if you want to be responsive community development in my community, you have to be working on climate issues. And that's something that, won't happen overnight, but I think that's what you want to build towards is hopefully getting regulatory agencies to also inquire, about that when they ask banks, how are they being locally responsive to needs?
Joe, do you mind if I jump in for a sec and just there's a
Go for
question
it.
from there's a question from an old friend I didn't know. So Dana, do you want to ask your question in Dana Archer Rosenthal? Do you want to ask your question out loud? Would that work? Or do you want me to read it?
I'm not sure if she can, so you go ahead and read it.
Okay. For those who don't know, Dana is sort of related to Cliff Rosenthal. Do banks typically include grants from their foundations toward their CRA requirements? Spring Bank is an anomaly. Oh, no, maybe. We're not an anomaly in that sense, but yeah, we actually make most of our grants to the nonprofits that bank with us, and thankfully there are many of those. But again, this is not a way that we gain our CRA credits. So I don't know, James, if you have any experience with that, or Amy or Kevin, with banks using their foundation dollars.
Well, I think honestly, I think I've seen it from the biggest banks. Obviously, I think Wells Fargo participated obviously on this, or I've seen and worked with for the Wells Fargo Foundation, but I think also, we at Spring are working on an organization called Floodline, who is a customer of the bank, but a flood mitigation project in a couple neighborhoods where we've supported local nonprofits that are working with that on the design of a solution. Ultimately, is because we think that if we can develop a micro customer loan, that we can develop a way to support flood mitigation in our neighborhoods that we serve. And so we're experimenting and working with folks around, frankly, loan product design, and we can then support local nonprofits that are supporting the communities that already.
Yeah, and I'm assuming other banks go about this, in a similar fashion, which is that if there's a combination of a grant support and a business case to be made, that's a win-win for a bank, I think. So, but Joey, go ahead. Did you want to look? I just was
No
glad to
worries.
call. Go ahead.
Thanks for jumping in there. And we have about like one more question. I thought this was a really good question. What counts as infrastructure and who decides? For example, what about hardware and digital tools that make up communications infrastructure for disaster resilience? I thought that was a really interesting question.
Amy, James, anybody, Kevin, go for
Amy,
it.
I think James or Kevin. Sure.
I'd say Amy, go for it. What is it? What's infrastructure?
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't go for it. I'm with you. I think that it is really unclear what a tool is, or what's a capital and what's an expense, and what about maintenance. So I'm with you on
I also
that. I don't know if
think
you have a more technical answer,
the
James.
only thing I would add to that though, Amy, is I think there's a public good and data and understanding of like infrastructure. There's a public good component to it all that we all need to understand better, because like all of our decisioning should be made aligned with protecting our economic interests. And so all capital should be aligned, every dollar of public. So this is where I think generally like realigning capital is an important part of defining what that infrastructure is and the tools that get us there.
But James, I think the question is asking who does that. Is it done by the bank or the state or the
It's
CR,
everybody.
the
It's
Department of
everybody. It's
Treasury?
it's everybody from the top to the bottom. Like I think everyone has to align to work together on outcomes.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree with anything that's been said. I think some of the stuff that's talked about in the guides will provide some specific examples, like the cooling centers we talked about, the resiliency hubs, the parks that double as storm water systems. Those are like the larger infrastructure projects. But then I think there's also, more micro or smaller scale infrastructure projects that can be still very helpful. Things like, like microgrids, solar batteries, things that like in a really severe storm would reduce the chances of losing power. Those are things that it's very easy to make the connection to CRA for, as long as, it's serving in a low to moderate income census tract or distressed rural tracts and things like that. But yeah, I think infrastructure there's the really large, huge projects, and then there's the smaller scale specific ones. But we really need all of it, and hopefully these guides will be able to help you start having these conversations with banks and regulators in your community. And speaking for myself, I'm more than happy to, and I'm sure Rebuild by Design is too, but please do just, come to us with your questions and how we can kind of help kind of come up with more specific and tailored strategies and recommendations. But I think the guides are a really good way to start thinking about this.
Thanks for that segue, Kevin. I'm dropping it in the guides in the chat right now. And just wanted to upload one more comment here from Ramona. Communities need plans and the resources to acquire the necessary intelligence to build their capacity to effectively engage in equitable, community-driven CED. CRA can also be used as a tool for gentrification displacement. Banks can support that capacity building under the service testing category. So just wanted to uplift that one comment. Thank you for that. And with that, thank you everybody so much for coming. Special thanks to our moderator, Melanie, and our panelists, Amy, Kevin, and James. I thought the questions for this were fantastic, and it was a really interesting discussion. So with that, I'll let everybody go, but thank you so much again.